I said we vote because of the blood oath that's been spilled for our past leaders and ancestors who have all been killed, to fight for a right that we as humans deserve. That's a reason why I vote, but it's only the first. Why vote? You should vote if you care about your community. I mean, look at your everyday life and tell me, what do you see? Please have mercy on me. Why vote? Is it a perfect place full of peace, love, and positivity? Or are there some problems that can be solved and room for more productivity? Most people hear the word vote and think of a U.S. president, when in reality that position for us is irrelevant. Do you know about state representatives, governors, mayors, or city council members, attorney generals, sheriffs, judges, and local commissioners? See, there are many positions of power. We all have a power to impact. But the true reason why we are enslaved is within us, and that's a fact. Please have mercy on me. Please have a little mercy on me. Why vote? Why vote? I vote because I'm black. I vote because at the end of the day, I'm the only one that's gonna have my back. I vote because when I was 16,
wake up, wake up. Yeah. It's that time, y'all. Good morning. It's the dark side of education. We live on Justice for the Cities and Citizen Ed. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. What's good with you? Whichever platform you're watching on. Good morning. Now, thank you. I hope you got your coffee. I needed a little extra coffee this morning. I slept real good last night for some reason. It's hard to get up this morning, but easier when I got to thinking about all these things we got to talk about today. I hope you had a good week. Finished pouring that cup of coffee, steeping that tea, whatever you drinking, pour it up, y'all. It's what you do with tea, right? You steep it. I ain't had no tea in a while. I'm a coffee person, but good morning again. It's the dark side of education. I'm your host, Rashad Turner. We talking about all things education. Glad you're here. Got some shout outs. I want to send a shout out to my lovely Nana. It's her 71st birthday yesterday. Happy birthday, Nana. I love you so much. We love our Nanas, our grandparents, right? Shout out to all the grandparents out there holding it down, making sure we all right. I was able to drop her off a nice little pen and a card. I didn't get to spend too much time with her, but love you, Nana. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. But what up, though, y'all? It's another Sunday. We here. I hope you're ready to get it popping. Last week, I might have got it, I don't want to say too popping, but did I ruffle a few feathers last week? I was getting some calls and some emails as if I went too hard on these people, right? We always gonna go hard on the status quo. And I'm glad there were some status quo folks tuning in. It's always something to learn for y'all too. So last week, we're talking about all of the high schoolers who are being assigned F grades in 40% of their classes. And guess what, y'all? Those numbers haven't improved. And the focus last week was about our children in general. But today, we're going to hone in a little bit, right? Think about how all of this distance learning and lack of learning, lack of educating that's happening right now. Think of how that's affecting our students who are receiving special education and language services. We're going to dive into that a little bit. And I'll say, right, at least those students who are supposed to be receiving those services. And we're going to see how that's going. I also talked last week about the folks who are grand in their roles as leaders of the teachers unions and wizards at keeping our children illiterate. more specifically, Nick Faber, St. Paul Federation of Educators. And I'll get back to the Klan later on in the show. And while it's still early, Nick Faber, union leaders, you always have an open invitation to come on the show and try to defend the indefensible. Always open invitation for y'all. Nick Faber, Denise Specht, Wino Garden, any of y'all. You grand wizards of keeping our children from a quality education. Come join me if you want to. I also talked last week a little bit about how the system, does its best to keep information from us, right? A question for y'all who are tuning in: how do you know how effective your child's school is? All right, what data points are you looking at? Where do you find that information? All right, I'm always talking about different solutions and things like that. I want to try to see if I can pull up this Minneapolis School Finder site. I put lotion on today, so my hands are a little slippery. But MinneapolisSchoolFinder.org. I'll put it in the comments before the show's over. It's a website. If you're looking for school in Minneapolis, there's a bunch of data points on there. Things about the school, culture of the school, some highlights, things like that. So that's a site you could check out if you're looking for schools in Minneapolis. If you are in Minnesota and you're trying to check out a school that's not in Minneapolis, I'll tell you this: you ain't going to have a website out there that's as good as MinneapolisSchoolFinder.org, but you can check out the Minnesota report card. And I'll just let y'all know, it took me a while to figure that Minnesota report card out, right? Another example of, how they don't make this information easily accessible. And even when you get there, it's hard to navigate once you get on there. But I'll drop those links in the comments before the show is over. But today, y'all, I told you I need a little extra coffee. I hope you got yours. Today, I don't know if y'all seen this article this past week. It's sort of resurfaced on social media. It's about the teacher who taught for 17 years and couldn't read or write. Yeah, you heard that correctly. Teacher for 17 years, but couldn't read or write. Y'all seen that one? So I peeped this. It's a BBC article. You might have seen it online. You might not have. I'll toss it in there at the end as well. But this guy says, I was a teacher for 17 years, but I couldn't read or write. The first thing was just like, LOL, right? And yeah, again, you heard me correctly, 17 years. And how does that happen? I mean, now of course, y'all know this is a white guy. Well, for sure, a white person, right? You don't have to read the article to know that. Just kidding. No, I'm serious as hell, right? You already know. If you're a person of color, we ain't making it through the interview. We can't read or write. I mean, hell, we're barely making it through our 20s because we weren't taught how to read, let alone making it through an application or an interview. Cogitate, right? Well, let me get back to the point I was making. How does it happen? How does it happen where a human being who can't read or write can become a teacher and teach our children for 17 years? Tenure? No, that's not where I'm going. But if you look at the article, right, there's a part of this article which I think is just the illest part of the article, right? And it talks about how his teachers, basically at every grade, just passed him on. Told his parents, oh, he's going to be all right. He'll get it. And passed him on to the next grade. Now, when you think about that, right? And I know it's easy to sort of get into the, oh, well, this happened because he's white or because they're white. but vibe with me, right? It's easy to get into that culture war stuff, right? But vibe with me for a second. This same thing is happening today. Every day to our children who are stuck in persistently low performing schools, right? Where 8 out of 10 children are not taught how to read. And somehow, well, not even somehow, we know how, right? They'll be okay. They'll catch on. They're so pleasant to be around. They make everyone laugh. Have you ever heard a teacher say some of that stuff about your child, your children? They talk about every social thing that they can think of. They play great at recess. All of that to distract us from the real deal information. And then our children are off to the next grade, and the next grade, and the next grade. And then they walk across that graduation stage functionally illiterate, ready for the world and everything in it. Yeah, right. So when you think about this, think about how many of our children is this happening to this year? Now, if you're in Minnesota, you can think back to last spring where most school districts said, well, we're just going to give you a passing grade. A passing grade because, you know, that's just how we do things. So if you think about this year, how many of our children, and let me back up, how many of our children they're going to try to just pass on to the next grade? All right. This is Dark Side of Education, y'all. I'm Rashad Turner. We live on Citizen Ed and Justice for the Cities. Appreciate y'all tuning in. It's amazing what's happening in our education system. And I think the one thing I think about all the time is that all of the cracks that have existed in our education system, they're leaking right now. They're leaking. The system is on the ropes. And what are we going to do about it? We're going to just let them pass our children on to the next grade? We're going to just let them tell us how great our kids' smile is and continue to not tell us about how they're failing to educate our children? It's one of those years, I think, and I talked about this last week, right? People are saying, hey, we got to get back to normal. We got to get back to normal. We can't go back to normal. All right, we can't. There are going to be so many children, so many of our children who are just pushed into the cracks this year. Not because they're not capable, because we know all children are capable of learning. Not because parents don't care about our children's education, but because a system that has been broken but never addressed in a way that has led towards quality education for our children. And we're seeing it. It doesn't matter if you're in Minnesota, you're in California, wherever you at, you are seeing a system that was designed to produce the results it's getting, but it wasn't designed to deal with this pandemic, right? They didn't have anything in place to keep us from seeing just how bad that system is. And if you think about, you know, oftentimes we're hearing about all children. All children. That's how they try to do this. But when we zoom in to children of color, low-income white kids, It's a little bit different story, right? And before I get into, special education and language services during distance learning, which, I'm going to share some stuff that, might shock you, might not. But before we get to that, I see y'all got these comments cracking. Let's see what's up in here. Oh, mother, grandma. Hey, grandma. Grandma, you up watching? Good morning. I don't want to show that one, but yeah. Good morning to you too. Ed Brew. Let's see what we got in here. Y'all's getting it popping. It's always hard for me to keep up with the comments. I try. But I try to get into this groove and just this coffee starts kicking in and it's like, I can't keep up with the comments. I got to get somebody in here for that. But y'all keep chopping it up. Always feel free to chop it up in them comments. I'm going to try to look through them. I'll look through them after the show and chop it up. But special education and language services during distance learning. Now, earlier this past week, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, Angela Davis of Minnesota Public Radio, NPR, she did a show and it was titled Education at the Crossroads for Students with Disabilities. And that show got me thinking about stories that I've heard over the past, since the beginning of COVID, really. But maybe think about the stories I've heard, right? About our children with disabilities who are not receiving the services they should be receiving from their school. I mean, imagine, right? And I think sometimes we have to look back on our own journey, right? To think back to the days when we were in K-12. All right. Think about all the friends or classmates you had who might have needed some extra support. Right. When I was younger, I needed some extra support. A lot of stuff I had to process and deal with. I needed that extra guidance. Needed some extra TLC. All right. Think about those school days when you didn't have the support you needed, though. How were those days? Because I think it's easy sometimes when we're talking about education or talking about different issues to sort of keep it at a distance, right? Arm's length away. Oh, you ain't talking about me. You ain't talking about my children. Right? But think back to your own experience. Those days when you didn't have the support you needed. Those days that might have been, you might have had a rough morning. Well, right now in Minnesota and a lot of other states, but I like to focus on Minnesota because one thing I know about Minnesota is that we always like to talk about how it's happening everywhere. And I think that is one of the reasons why our education gaps continue to widen, continue to grow, right? So right here in Minnesota, our children with special needs and IEPs are being left behind. Even further behind, if you think about it, right? And the interesting thing about this is that they're not receiving those services they need. But guess what? The schools are still receiving that money, though. That hasn't changed. And if you didn't know, right, schools are, students have per pupil funding. And if your child has special needs or receives special education services, schools are provided with additional funding. So what the hell are the schools doing with all that money? Because we know, whether it's, I remember I had Jim Vu on here, St. Paul Public Schools board member, right? He talked about his experience with his children who have special needs and how tough it's been because of the lack of services. So if schools are still getting that money, and we know that several parents, several families have reported not receiving the services they need, where is all of that money going, right? Imagine all of the schools that are profiting off of the overrepresentation of Black boys and girls and Native American boys and girls labeled EBD. Right? Children who are labeled EBD, let's say 2 years ago. And for the past 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, they have not been receiving the services they need. So where is that money going? Why are families stuck in a situation where, I mean, think about this, right? And I want to back up a second to that overrepresentation, right? Because one of the things I did think about is that something that might be good about this year, that overrepresentation of EBD, it won't grow. It might not have increased this year. So that's one thing, you know, I might want to be thankful for this year. But imagine that money, y'all. All of that money that they're getting for our children and not providing the service. And I'm not going to tell you how to think, but think about this for a second, right? I'll just ask you like this. What is the domino effect when our public education system, which has been controlled by killers of hopes and dreams for many years, killers of hopes and dreams, y'all know, right? Teachers unions. You got it. But what is that domino effect? And what are they doing with that money if not properly serving our children? Now, see, gotta mix in some water every once in a while, right? Now, see, check this out, right? What are they doing with that money? They damn sure aren't putting it in the hands of families. Right? They're not putting that money into the hands of families. Now imagine if English isn't your native language. English isn't the language that is spoken at home. How do you think our children are doing? How else could they be doing if they're sitting on a Zoom and can't understand the damn thing that's being said? At best, they're repeating whatever they hear the teacher say. I mean, can you imagine your classmate in Zoom who speaks Spanish and the teacher can't read or write in English? No, but really, imagine sitting there in class, your classmate is sitting there speaking Spanish, and your teacher is a non-Spanish speaking white woman. Because we know that, you know, in Minnesota, 94% of our teachers are white women. But imagine being in that class. And you might be even thinking, like, how does this even happen? We're in 2020, and our public education system has our children sitting in class, learning nothing, with no support for our children or for the teacher. Right? Because you might have just thought I just made up a scenario about a child sitting in a class just repeating what the teacher was saying because they couldn't understand. But that's a true story. And it's sad because when you think about that domino effect, right? I mean, put yourselves in the seat, the shoes of the parent. You now have to not only try and work a job, if you're blessed enough to have not been laid off during this time, but you have to work that job, take care of your children's learning. And there's some days where, you know, I don't have 4 kids, but some days there's 4 children learning at my house. It's hard for me to keep up. And imagine if we didn't speak English. And here we are getting these homework packets. Here we are getting these Zoom invites in English, which we don't understand. And then we're blamed as parents if our students can't participate, right? But the system is set up as we're seeing, for our children not to be able to participate. Our Latinate children not to be able to participate. You get that? I mean, one of the things about St. Paul, right? There's a Latino consent decree, right? And I want y'all to really try to just understand this. In St. Paul schools, 8 full-time licensed Spanish English teachers, 15 bilingual support staff, and this is according to their 2018 report. Probably hasn't improved in 2020. Now you compare that against 4,000 plus students and their families. You know, they say your budget shows your priorities. It's clear that even with this protection of a Latino consent decree, our Spanish-speaking children, Spanish-speaking families are not prioritized. So what do you think is happening? What do you think is happening, right? And it's a similar situation for Hmong, Somali, and Korean-speaking families, right? Except they don't have that protection, right? That protection of the consent decree, right? That legal agreement with the district. And that's why you see even less recourse for those families. When it comes to that inadequate and uneven resources, right? And think about Black families. I mean, you tell me, where are all of the Black educators? All children deserve effective Black teachers and school leaders too. And the point is, right, St. Paul Public Schools and St. Paul Federation of Educators negotiations, they don't add up to quality education, y'all. It's time to change the equation. And now this is in St. Paul, but wherever you're tuning in from, could be happening there. Probably is happening there. So when you think about the folks who are at the table controlling what that experience and environment is like for our children, who's not there? Who hasn't been brought to the table? People say, oh, well, you know, parents aren't engaged. But where's the seat at the table? It's something we got to think about, y'all. It's just something, I mean, we can't continue to let it just happen to us, right? We have to push this thing. And now's that time. It's never been a better time, really. These folks obviously don't know what they're doing. Everybody's pissed off. So we have to change that equation. And it's like people say, well, what are we left to do? All right, there was a person on Twitter who said, hey, we have to exit. He said they were working with their child to get him to get ready to exit. And I definitely think that's one of the solutions, right? It's one of the solutions when we know, like, hey, as parents, it's hard to juggle teaching, working, right? Think about providing special education services, learning how to speak English and teach English at the same time, right? And that's with, again, little to no support from the schools, little to no support from school districts. And again, the schools are getting the money. You might be sitting at home and you're like, well, They can't be getting all of that money because they ain't doing a damn thing. Well, no, they're still getting that money. They're getting that money to provide what? It's definitely not a quality education. And it's only adequate and uniform, which is the standard here in Minnesota. But it's only adequate and uniform when it comes to the fact that most children of color and low-income white children are not receiving the services they need. Most English learners not receiving the services they need. So there you have it. That's uniform, right? Nobody getting nothing except for, the families who are living maybe in those, what they call wealthier zip codes, all right? The families with some money. And that balances it out, right? Everybody over here, you children of color, low income white child, you're getting nothing. And they balance it out by making sure the Wyzettas, the Minnetonkas, the Woodburys, those are, y'all might not know where that's at if y'all ain't from Minnesota, but those are, some of our more wealthy zip codes. And I probably missed a few, obviously, but that's how they balance it out. So our children of color, low-income white children, not getting what they need. And because all this education system has to provide is a uniform and adequate system of schools, they're getting away with it. I mean, get a load of that. If there's one thing and only one thing that we take away from these past months of school, I hope it's this, y'all. I hope it's this, truly. I hope it's that we see that our schools are nothing but empty buildings. Nothing but empty buildings and promises without children and families. I'm going to say that again, right? I hope that we see that our schools are nothing but empty buildings and promises without children and families. So what school looks like from here on out should be decided by those of us who are the gaps. All right. I mean, there's really no gap, right? There's no gap. If you were to draw this out on a piece of paper, I still drawing stick figures, but a real artist, if you were to draw this out on a piece of paper, there's no way you see a gap. What you see, or what you should see, is our children, right? In that gap are our children. It's crazy, y'all. And it gets me frustrated because it's like in Minnesota, this is year after year after year that our education system has been getting worse. It's been getting worse. Every year, the state tries to, a couple of years ago, I think our graduation rate went up 0.5%. And they had a parade for that. But what they didn't say at the parade was, well, hey, that 0.5% there really turned out to be, 60% who were in remedial courses, developmental courses, once they got to college, right? So in Minnesota, there's a low bar. And it's like, who is setting that low bar? I know who's setting it. And then we have to think about, well, who's allowing them to set that low bar, right? I can talk about the system all day. I can talk about the teachers' unions and how they do us. But it's one of those things that, I've been hearing a lot over this past week. Folks are ready to step up, right? Folks are ready to step up and make sure that the system doesn't win this time, right? That the system doesn't look the same as it did 10 months ago, right? People always talk about, well, parents aren't, they're not engaged. They don't care. That's not true. Because what we've seen, and this is something that I recognized a long, long time ago, but when George Floyd was murdered by Minneapolis police, and that uprising took place after, that community energy that was saying, hey, we ain't going for this, that energy is still present, right? That energy was flowing right through the community. And what were we also dealing with? Right? We had also just come out of that distance learning experience. We had just come out of that time where thousands of our children were just passed on to the next grade. So a couple of things, right? If you're a parent and you're watching this, and this is if you're in Minnesota, wherever you at, get on that parent advisory council at your school. Get on that site council, right? Get to that decision-making table so it's no longer the same folks who have always been there doing things how they've always done things, making those decisions. You feel me? Now, another thing I wanted to talk about, and this, last week I sort of talked about this. In Minnesota, we got a lot of folks who are anti-police union, but they love the teachers unions. We got a lot of teachers and people who, want to fight racism. They want to fight racism, but they want to fight it everywhere except within their teachers unions. And to me, it's like, if you're a teacher, you're part of that teachers union, do you really want to fight racism? I'd suggest you start right there with your teachers unions, right? Because there's not much that you can do for our children that's going to last, right? That's going to have that significant impact, positive impact, as far as the school environment, the curriculum, the teachers who are in front of the class. None of that stuff is going to matter if you're not taking on that teachers union, right? You can stand out there with your signs, you can go to the marches, you can do all of that stuff. But if you're not setting your sights on the policies of the teachers unions that keep our children stuck in the muck, then what are you really doing? And it's frustrating because, to me, if you know how to fight racism, if you are woke and ally, I'm not quite sure why you are just sort of glossing over your teachers unions. I mean, here in Minnesota, I can remember rallies where folks were, talking about divest from private prisons. What I didn't hear at those rallies or after those rallies from any of those racism fighting educators, I didn't hear anything about how the teachers unions at one point, and maybe still for the St. Paul Federation of Educators, still trying to uncover that info, but how teachers unions invest or have invested in private prisons. So divest from private prisons, but don't, we don't know what you're talking about with the teachers unions. You have teachers out here who rally for more teachers of color. You have initiatives that are set up to have more Black men teach. Great. But what are we really doing if we know that the system, right, the policies that the teachers unions put in place keep Black men from the classroom? They keep Black women out of the classroom. They keep teachers of color out of the classroom. They keep effective teachers out of the classroom. So how much are we really fighting racism for educators, teachers, school leaders, if we're not fighting the racism right there within the teachers unions? And it's just something I ask folks to think about, right? I'm not trying to bash you because you call yourself an equity warrior and you're a part of a union that, produces the most inequities that you don't address for some reason. I mean, the question is, will more teachers fight the racism within the teachers union? And people give me all types of reasons why, they're scared of retaliation. They don't want to come across as, too much of a radical. What? Like that stuff is more important? All right, you've had the opportunity to go to college, start a career, and how your teachers union might treat you is more important than how they're treating our children. I mean, think about this for a second, right? Folks will say they don't want to go after their own union because they're in fear of retaliation. What? Yeah, what does that tell you? Right? If the teachers union will retaliate against their own members for standing up, for speaking up against the bull crap, what does that tell you about the teachers unions? So it's just one of those things that if you're going to call yourself an equity warrior, champion of children, whatever else you call yourselves, you have to, and I know I'm not the only one who feels this way, you have to stand up against that teachers union. Otherwise, all of your efforts, in my opinion, are for nothing. Right? It's sort of like how I think about this education advocacy work, how I think about the work of Minnesota Parent Union, and how I feel about other organizations who say they are fighting for our children to have quality education, right? I feel like if we were to just focus on getting more of our children quality education, and we only focused on that from, let's say, one angle, and we ignored the teachers unions and allowed them to continue that control, I would say that all of our work, although, some folks might, oh, that's a win. But I would say because of our high expectations, because of the fact that, yes, enough is enough, I would say that if we're not knocking that teachers union down a few notches, we're not doing everything that we can. We're not doing what needs to be done to make sure that whatever solutions parents drive, whatever happens with education, like, we have to be in that driver's seat. And if we ain't knocking that teachers union down a few notches, what are we doing? So I feel the same way for teachers. If you're fighting racism, if you're all about equity, what are you doing? by not focusing on that teachers union. And I was on a panel on Friday, and I said this on the panel. It was not students, public allies. There were some public allies going through their program, and I'm always trying to speak that truth to power. I'm always trying to bring it in a way that's going to, wake you up a little bit. And I said on this panel, and I'll say it here, there's not one way to go after the teachers union. There's not one way, only one way to fight that racism. But you have to find a way, right? You can't be out here acting like you're all about justice and ignoring the injustices, right? Ignoring those injustices of your teachers unions. What's up with that? So as we think about the education system, as we think about solutions, I say we have to keep in mind that the teachers unions, those racist folks, they don't take a break. They don't take a day off in their execution of keeping our children of color and low-income white children at the bottom, keeping them away from quality education. And they know all of the tricks. They will parade you around. And right now it's all virtual, right? So they'll, if you go on Twitter, you'll see Education Minnesota, who won't budge on LIFO, right? Last in, first out. You'll see them parading around teachers who have been fired, laid off because of that ineffective policy. And in my opinion, some folks just allow them to do it, right? Some folks will say what are just so powerful. We have to change the dynamic, right? We have to change our lens on who has the power. And I know I talked about earlier how the system hides that information from us. So it won't be easy, but it's a must. Another thing I heard or saw on Facebook, and this was kind of funny. I think it was a reply to my post where I said teachers are fighting racism everywhere except for in their unions. And a sister replied, but they're in their book club. Isn't that good enough? Now I know folks, and I started cracking up too, right? I thought that was super funny. But I know folks who participate in book clubs. Don't turn it off. If you're in a book club, stay tuning in. I ain't gonna clown you too much. But I know folks who are in the book clubs. And you know what those folks do with their book clubs? They turn it into action. Right? There's a group of mostly white folks right now, and this isn't even education related, but book club related. There's a group of white folks right now, mostly white folks in St. Paul, Minnesota, who are having a book club, going through a book club to learn more about reparations, to learn more about organizing. So they can then take action, which is coming up here pretty soon, so they can take action to get this reparation study in St. Paul. Right? So when I think about the book clubbers, and I love to read books, right? I used to love it as a kid even more, right? When you get, you read 5 books or something, you get a little personal pizza from Pizza Hut. I used to love that. Read so many books, get free books. That was great. So I know you're in there because you love to read. And my call to you would be, don't let that book club fool you, right? Reading a book, there's a lot of folks who read books and think that, they got it all under control. Take that book club and turn it into action, right? It can't just be like, hey, we're going to sit around, we're going to read this book about Black people. So we can be, more aware. It's 2020, homies. It's 2020. And I know everybody moves at their own pace. I know that there's value in, being a part of a club, in that shared learning, that shared understanding that is created through that. But I would say, make sure it's tied to action. And I don't know how it is where you're at, but if you're here in Minnesota, we got that thing, Minnesota Nice, which makes it easy for some folks to just sort of think they've done enough. Some folks think that book club, that's it. That book club for some folks becomes like their one black friend. All right, where they can say, well, hey, I'm a part of this. It sounds good. They get to learn all of the buzzwords, but it's about that action. And if you're in a book club, push for the action, right? Don't let it be something that I want to clown you about or other people want to clown you about in the comments. Turn it into the action. My question for teachers, right? Will more of y'all step up, stand up against the racism of the teachers unions? When we truly think about things in education, and I know I go after ineffective teachers, I go after the teachers unions, but if we're talking about our children, if we're talking about those truly effective educators who are doing everything they can to make sure our children have a chance, if we really look at the barriers that are there, whether it's for our children or for the teachers who care, the educators who care, those barriers are put in place by the same folks. All right, so when we really think about, the working conditions that I mentioned last week of the support staff who are, in these essential kids care programs. All right, when you think about that lack of support for those staff, those teachers, you think about that lack of support for our children, it's coming from the same place. All right. Look at these comments. Y'all kept it cracking up in here. We got up in here. Christina says, if you're an equity warrior, but every child you are responsible for doesn't have what he, she, they needs to be successful in education, you're not living the truth. So it's easy. And I'll just say this, right? Christina is a real equity warrior. Christina is down for the cause, 10 toes down for our children. So I know, and I knew I could figure Christina would understand this. All of us have to get that information and get to a point where we have that understanding, right? And I'm looking at, I think Michelle, sorry if I messed up your name, Michelle, Miss Newell, they say, I am not a part of any teachers union. I have no frame of reference regarding these issues personally. And I'm glad that you made this comment. We have to go and get it, right? These are the things that they're not going to just be widely available, right? Our team, when it comes to the teachers union, we have a document that's almost finalized. That's about 5 or 6 pages that outline the ills of the teachers union. And I don't know if we're gonna, release that publicly, but we might. But we got to go get that information, right? It's just what we have to do. What else we got up in these comments? Don Allen, teacher. A teacher in St. Paul, matter of fact. Sorry, Don, if I, shouldn't have put that out there, but silence is death. And I agree, Don, right? And folks have to really think about it. If we are not focusing on, we're not calling out those who are responsible for Minnesota's worst in the nation education gaps, education outcomes, it is leading to death. And it might be, not the easiest thing to try to dive into or think deeply about, but when you think about it, that's what happens. I mean, what is life like for our children who are functionally illiterate? What does that mean for the community? Definitely bringing this up with some community folks tomorrow. Has to be happening in my city. I don't know which part we was talking about, but if it's education injustice, which is what, all of this is, I agree with you. I'd say you're probably right. It's happening in your city. It's especially, if you have Black children in your city, if there's children of color in your city, poor white children in your city, it's happening. What else we got here? And the thing with these comments is I can't even, they move around and all of that. But anyways, y'all been grinding in the comments, There's Toya Jackson. I live in Berkeley. Is that Cali? California? Oh yeah, it's happening. Cali got some real issues out there, just like Minnesota, right? Well, all right, y'all. It's snowy. It's kind of cold here in Minnesota. It might be above freezing, but I'm going to go ahead and get to this Sunday. Again, this is Dark Side of Education. I'm going to drink some more coffee, get back to some work. I hope y'all have a great day, right? We got to do something, y'all, right? If you think about it, and I'm going to start just reminding us of this. It's time to reclaim our public education system, y'all. We have to transform our schools into those quality learning environments. And at the same time, if we're getting pushback on that, well, then we got to get the hell out, right? If schools don't want to change, going back to that Twitter comment or whatever you call that on Twitter, the Twitter reply, exit, right? If they don't want to listen to your voice, exit. Start your own school. Because I'll tell you, right, in the midst of all of this, there's going to be some new schools opening in Minnesota. And that's just something that we have to do, right? Uniform and adequate systems of schools, they're having a negative impact on us. All of us, y'all. And this, whether you're in Minnesota, you're in Cali, you're out east, wherever, was happening before COVID, y'all. Quality is a must. Failure is not an option, y'all. Thanks for joining me today on Citizen Ed and Justice for the Cities. This is Dark Side of Education. It's with me, you. Together, y'all, we'll crush the status quo. See y'all next week, God willing. God's peace and blessings, y'all. Holla at y'all.